Hello and welcome back to Something Z, and welcome to If Deku Was a Saiyan Part 5. Last time on the What If, the finals for Class 1A happened, and Bakugo and Izuku were able to pass their final by working together to run and fight All Might. And a couple days later, the summer training camp happened. But after a couple of days of camp, the camp gets attacked by the League of Villains, with Izuku having to fight Muscular and a whole group of villains by himself, which he lost to. And after the attack, Bakugo and Tokoyami were taken away. And because of the damage he sustained during the attack, Deku got a Zenkai boost, so now his power level is around 350. So he's at the strength of 1 for all at 10%. Okay, so now that's out of the way, let's jump into the video in 3, 2, 1. So it begins with what if the day after the attack, and when Izuku woke up, he found himself in a hospital bed. And wondering about what happened, Izuku turned on the TV that was in his room. And by spending some time watching TV, he was able to tell that the League was able to escape, and how many people were injured in the attack, and how the media is crowding outside the entrance of UA, demanding they make a statement. And after Izuku got the information, he went back to sleep. So now we skip a couple of hours, and the remaining students of Class 1A who weren't injured are captured in Izuku's hospital room. And after some talking, Kirishima tells Izuku that he has a plan to save Bakugo and Tokoyami, and that they have a way to trace where the League of Villains are hiding, and the place they are most likely keeping the two. And hearing this, everyone tells Kirishima that they should leave it to the pros, and that they don't want to have another Ida situation to happen again. But they weren't able to change his decision, and before he leaves, he tells Izuku that he will leave tomorrow night. And shortly after Kirishima leaves, the rest of Class 1A leaves to go home as well. And the moment they left, Izuku knew what he wanted to do, which was to save his classmates, since he failed to save them last time. And after they left, a doctor came into Izuku's room, and he was told that because he overdid it with his fights during the attack, he now has some permanent scars and a bit of nerve damage that's in his hands, which can be helped with a bit of surgery. But since Izuku knew that if he got surgery, he wouldn't be helpful during the rescue, he told the doctor that he was good for now, and he would get the surgery done at a later date. And after that, Izuku was done with his checkups for the day. And when Izuku was alone, Izuku began to work out, which allowed him to get used to his now little numb hands. And after a couple hours of this, Izuku looked for something in the book Goku gave him, which would allow him to get stronger. And after a couple of minutes, Izuku found the perfect technique called the Kaioken, which should allow him to multiply his power without having to go into Super Saiyan, in exchange making him vulnerable to damage. And on the top of the page there was a giant warning label on the top saying, "Warning, dangerous if not handled properly, should only multiply up to 2 times. So from then on, when Izuku was alone, Izuku would practice the Kaioken, and by the time of the rescue, Izuku can multiply his power by 1.5 for a span of 20 minutes in his normal state, depending on what he's doing. So now we jump to later that night, and when Izuku gets to the meeting place, the people that were there were Momo, Todoroki, and Kirishima. And after a bit of talking, they began to follow the trace Momo put on Nomu during the attack at the camp. And after half an hour, the group makes it to what seems like a normal building. But when they look inside from the window, they see that this place is where the Nomus are being created. But before they could do anything, they saw a mountain lady grow taller than the building itself, and she kicked the building, destroying the entire building. And seeing that the pros were already at the scene, the group was about to leave. But before they could go too far, an explosion happened where the pros were. And the explosion was so strong that it blew away the surrounding buildings. So now only a wall was left of the building the group was hiding behind. And when the dirt settled, Izuku peeks from the side of the remaining wall. And when the dirt settles, Izuku peeks from the side of the remaining wall to see what happened. And when he does, he sees many of the pro heroes on the ground, and they seem to be unconscious. And in the middle of the destroyed area, there was Bakugo and Tokoyami. And a couple feet away from them was the League of Villains, with some of them knocked out, but some were starting to get back up. And standing on some rubble above, a couple feet away, there was a new villain that Izuku believed was the boss, because he seemed to have a dangerous aura around him. And after a couple of seconds, the League members that were awake began to fight Bakugo and Tokoyami. And after a bit of fighting between the groups, All Might comes from the skies above, and he collided with the villain in the suit. And when they collided, they seemed to have equal strengths. Then after a couple of seconds of the two just locking eyes, they began to fight. And after a couple minutes of these two fights, Izuku was finally able to come up with a plan in order to save Bakugo and Tokoyami. Because while he was watching, he realized that All Might was holding back, and he believed that it was because he was mainly scared to hurt the two students in the crossfire. And once Izuku explained his plan, everyone got ready. So Momo made a jetpack for Kirishima, and once he put it on, Izuku grabbed onto him while leaning against a nearby wall. And when everyone was positioned, Izuku began to channel his ki, and after a couple of seconds, his hair turned yellow. And when he was ready, Izuku jumped off the wall as hard as he could, and they rammed the two of them through the wall, with Kirishima using his hardening to allow them to break through the wall unscathed. And once they made the hole, Todoroki made an ice ramp, and using his momentum, Izuku ran up the ice ramp as fast as he could. And while he was running, he placed one arm behind him and he shot ki blast in order to push him more. And once they got to the end, Izuku threw Kirishima as hard as he could, higher into the air, which made him begin to fly away. And using the jetpack Momo gave him, Kirishima was able to stay into the air. And while he was in the air, Kirishima shouted for Bakugo to grab his hand, and to not worry about Tokoyami. And seeing that Izuku was there, Bakugo put both of his hands to the ground, and after a couple of seconds, he shot 2 massive explosions, which made a giant dirt cloud which hit Tokoyami, and it launched Bakugo high into the air and aimed directly at Kirishima. And after a couple of seconds, he was able to grab Kirishima's hand, and the two began to fly away. But once Magnus saw that Bakugo was getting away, he used his quirk to magnetize him, and that made Toga get attracted to him, making her fall into the air after them. But before she got close, Izuku shot out multiple ki blasts, which hit her in the chest, and that made her fall to the ground. And while the league was distracted and unable to see Tokoyami, Izuku flew into the dirt cloud and he grabbed Tokoyami by the arm and he flew him away. And seeing this again, Magna tried to use his magnetism again, with Toga being flung towards the two. But before she was able to get to them, Mountain Lady grew and she stopped her with a headbutt, making her fall to the ground. And after the headbutt, Mountain Lady shrank and fell to the ground. And shortly after the two groups were able to escape, Momo and Todoroki ran away. And shortly after they left the area, all three groups met at a plaza. And there, they watched a fight between All Might and All For One, with the results being the exact same. And a couple days later, Aizawa and All Might told all the parents of Class 1A that the students will be moving into the dorms. And because Izuku doesn't get as injured as he would have originally, Inko is okay with Izuku moving in. And a couple days later, they move in. But the things with Sue still happening. So now we skip a week before the school year begins. And by this point, Class 1A has settled into the dorms. And that morning, Aizawa tells Class 1A to meet him in Gym Gamma wearing their hero costumes. And when they get there, they are told that they will be coming up with ultimate moves for the provisional license exams. And once Aizawa was done explaining what ultimate moves were, he spread out all of Class 1A throughout the gymnasium, with them all taking an ectoplasm clone with them. And Izuku's Hero Suit modification made his costume stay the exact same, but now he has a staff because he decided that it would be better for him if he became more adept at using a weapon rather than him just punching and kicking. And the staff is red and made from hickory wood, and it is held in a pouch on his back. And for Izuku's ultimate move, it's not exactly an ultimate move, but rather a fighting style, because during the week he got used to fighting with the Kaioken, and how to use it with his ki blasts and things like that, so he can do the Kaioken Kamehameha, or something similar to that. And now he can do ×2 for a period of time. Okay, so now that's out of the way, let's jump to the day of the provisional license exams. And when Class 1 gets there, they meet Anasa and Miss Joke, and after they were done talking, they headed to the exam site. And once they got dressed in their hero costumes, they went to the main examination room. And once the main examiner believed that all the examinees were there, he began to explain the first part of the exams, which was a form of dodgeball, that only the first 100 examinees will pass. And once he was done explaining the rules, the other examiners passed out 3 balls and targets to each participant. And once the examinees placed the targets on themselves, the room began to unfold. And once the walls were completely flat, the examinees found themselves in a large arena. Then they were given a couple minutes to split up, and most of Class 1A stuck together. But Kirishima, Bakugo, and Kaminari leave, and they go on their own group. And Todoroki leaves, but by himself. And after a couple minutes, the exams begin. And when it started, all the other schools began to attack UA. And Izuku, seeing this, lost his weights almost immediately. And he began a run, and he used his strength and speed to avoid the balls being thrown at him. And whenever he couldn't avoid a ball, he used his staff to block it. And whenever he was free, he would grab a ball that was on the ground around him, and he would throw it as a counterattack. But after some time, Yo was able to tell that they wouldn't be able to get rid of Class 1A if they were all together. So he put his hands together on the ground, and he began to vibrate the ground. And after a couple of seconds, he began to create tremors, which began to split up all of Class 1A. And Izuku, seeing this, flew into the air. And when he did, he saw that all of his classmates fell into different areas. But since there was dirt flying everywhere, he couldn't find exactly where he was, but he flew in the direction he believed most of his classmates went. And after a minute of flying, Izuku noticed someone that looked familiar, so he went to pick them up. And when they were completely up, Izuku was able to see that the person was Sero. And after Sero was rescued, they hid behind a giant rock. And once they were behind the rock, they began to try to think of a way for them to find the class and get the targets they need was a skill set they currently have. But with the quirks they have, they couldn't think of an actual plan. So they decided to try to find their classmates. And after a couple minutes of sneaking around, they find Ochako, who was pinned to the ground with Kami on top of her, and she had one of her targets hit. And Kami was about to go for another one. But before she could hit it, Izuku shot out a quick ki blast which hit her in the back. And in the process, she dropped her ball she was holding. And once she got her composure back after a second, she jumped off of Ochako, and she began to run. But seeing this, Izuku turned on Super Saiyan, and he flew straight at her. But before he got to her, she hid behind a rock. And when Izuku got behind the rock, instead of finding Kami, no one was there. And seeing that she wasn't there, Izuku landed and he began to look around. But after a couple of seconds, Sero and Ochako were able to catch up to Izuku. And when they did, Ochako told Izuku that Kami was most likely gone, since while she was fighting her, she learned that she has the ability to disappear and reappear. And after she said that, Izuku turned off Super Saiyan, and when he did, the three began to think of a plan or get the targets that they needed. And once they came up with a plan, they put into action. So Izuku turned on Super Saiyan again and he began to fly around. And when he did, he drew in the crowd of enemy examinees. And when he got a decent amount of people, so around 30, he flew straight into the air. And while he was flying, he was putting ki into his hands. And before the enemy examinees could figure out what Izuku was doing, Ochako threw weightless boulders with Sero's tapes attached to them. And when the rocks flew past the group, the people Ochako gave them weight again. And when the rocks flew past the group of people, Ochako gave them weight again, which made Sero's tape hit the group, making them stick to the ground. And once they were tied down, Sero and Ochako got the targets that they needed. So they were told to go into the waiting room. And once Izuku heard this, he shot out his Kamehameha straight up, and it was powered up enough so everyone in the arena saw it. And once he was done shooting it, Izuku looked down. And when he did, he saw multiple groups of people beginning to swarm towards the area Izuku was in. So Izuku quickly swan dived down as fast as he could, and he grabbed a ball that was on the ground. And once he got the ball, he got the targets that he needed, announcing that he was now safe. And once that was announced, a group of people got to the group, and when they did, a giant fight broke out, with them all trying to get the targets of the people around them, and the people stuck to the floor. And after a couple seconds after the fight began, the remaining Class 1A students joined the fight. This includes Ayama as well. And while the fight was going on, Sero, Chaco, and Izuku walked to the waiting room. So now we skip to when they get there, and when they do, Team Bakugo, Kirishima, and Kaminari get to the waiting room at the same time. And after the group gets to the waiting room, they take off their targets, and they wait for the phase to end. So now we skip to when the first phase of the exam ends. And when it does, they are given a couple minutes to rest. And when the break was over, the main examiner got to the podium, and he began to congratulate them for making it so far. Then he shows them on a big screen at the front of the room the arena they were just in blow up. And when the explosions were over, the examiner told them that a villain just attacked the city, then fled. But then he tells them that there were many civilians that got caught in the crossfire, and he told them that it was their job to save them. And once he said that, the room began to unfold. And when the room was completely flat, the exams began. And when it did, most of Class 1A was in a giant group besides Bakugo, Kirishima, and Kaminari, who left on their own. And after a couple seconds of running, the group comes across a small child who had blood coming from their head. And Izuku got some points taken off his score because when he was inspecting the kid for injuries, he blurted out that this doesn't look good. And after Izuku got yelled at by the kid for being too blunt, Izuku put a smile on his face and he told the kid that everything would be okay. And when the kid hears this, he allows Izuku to take him. So Izuku then puts the kid onto his back, and when he was sure that the kid was secured, he began to fly as fast as he could towards the first aid station. And after a couple minutes, Izuku was able to secure the kid at the station. And when he was done with that, he was about to run back to the city to save more victims. But before he could get too far, Izuku and everyone in the arena heard on the speakers that the villain that attacked the city in the first place has come back for round 2. And right after the examiner said that, someone burst through the wall of the arena. And when the person burst through, Izuku and many of the examinees look to see who did it. And when they do, they see Gang Orca and a bunch of his sidekicks. And seeing this, Izuku began to run with the group of villains. But before he got halfway to them, Yo shouted for Izuku to stop. And when Izuku heard this, he stopped in his tracks. And when he did, Yo ran straight past him and he ran at the group head on. But before he got to them, he stopped and he put his hands to the ground. And right after he placed them, he began to create a shockwave, which made the ground around the group begin to shake. But as a counterattack, Gang Orca used his quirk to hit Yo point blank with an ultrasonic wave attack, paralyzing him. And when Yo hit the ground, Izuku ran towards the group again. But this time, Inasa and Todoroki ran with him, and they began to fight the group. But just like in the canon, Todoroki and Inasa start to fight, so random waves of flames go flying around the arena. And because of this, Izuku had a hard time fighting Gang Orca, because he wasn't able to stay in one place for very long before a wave of flames went at him. But after around a minute of stray flames flying around, a stray flame began to fly towards Yo, so Izuku quickly kicked Orca in the gut, launching him and Orca a couple of feet. And when Izuku landed, he ran to Yo as fast as he could, and he was able to get to Yo and scoop him up before the flame was able to get to either of them. And while Izuku was running with Yo in his arms, Izuku shouted, "What the hell is wrong with you two?" And hearing this, the two decided to work together. So after 30 seconds, the two were able to surround Gang Orca in a spiral of flames. But even though it was weakening him, it wasn't enough to defeat Gang Orca, because Gang Orca had a water bottle on him, and he dumped the water on his head, which allowed him to not get dried out. But before Gang Orca could get out of the spiral of flames, Izuku, who now had Kaioken ×2 activated, jumps through the flames and he punched Orca in the gut, using an uppercut, which caused Orca to get flung a couple feet into the air. And after getting flung, Orca aimed his head down and he fired a powerful shockwave. And because Izuku is vulnerable and weakened from using the Kaioken, Izuku's ears are completely ringing, so he can't really hear anything else. And there's even blood coming out of his ears. And feeling this, Izuku began to stumble, and right before Orca landed on top of Izuku, Izuku was able to jump out of the way. Then Izuku began to gather ki into his back, and after a couple of seconds, he was in Super Saiyan and Kaioken ×2. Then he did a powerful jump towards Orca, and when he did this, his leg broke the second he lost contact with the ground, and he punched Orca as hard as he could. And when Izuku made contact, Orca got flung so fast that he crashed into the arena wall. And Izuku was on the ground in pain because one of his arm and legs were broken, and he was now out of the form. And Izuku was now covered in pain from head to toe. Because of the ki imbalance the two forms caused him. But luckily, after a couple of seconds, the main examiner announced on the speakers that the final civilian has been saved. So now the exams are now over. And that's where I'm going to leave the What If. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you next time on Something Z.